Open your Bible with me this morning in the book of John, second chapter of John. I'm going to start a series this morning that I'm going to call Unbelievable. I'm going to look at the miracles of Jesus. The miracles of Jesus are scattered, as you know, throughout the Gospels, but one of the things that I've noticed is I think we have just a little problem with our reading and our understanding of the miracles. When we look at the miracles of Jesus, we become, I think, somewhat overwhelmed. The miracles of Jesus, I said this at the early service, the miracles of Jesus are so miraculous that I think we get caught up in the miracle itself. That Jesus would walk up to a tomb and say, "Lazarus, come forth," and Lazarus come forth. That kind of is, we get caught up in that. That's pretty cool. And we get caught up in the miracle. That Jesus walked on the water. That is, that's a little bit, just gets our attention. I don't know about you, but to some extent, I think sometimes my imagination is too good for my good. And when somebody gets to teaching or preaching on Jesus walking on the water, I kind of drift off and I begin to think about Jesus walking on the water. And I can see it. I can imagine that. When I hear of the miracles that Jesus performed, I see lepers being healed. I can kind of real quickly drift off, and I can imagine that scene. When I think of cripples being given back the ability to walk, or blind their sight, or the deaf their hearing, or the mute their speech, I can see that, and I get so caught up in the actual details of the miracle and I think to some extent all of us do. You like to think about that. What would that be like to see Jesus walk along and say, to a little girl, "Get up," to Lazarus, "Come forth," and we get so caught up in the actual details of the miracle that we miss an important question. And it's an important question that no matter where you're reading, not just the miracles in the Gospels, but whether you're in Genesis or Revelation, there's an important question that we have to ask that a lot of times as preachers and teachers, sometimes we forget about, and that's the question, so what? What difference does it make? So what if Jesus walked on the water? So what if Jesus raised the dead? So what if Jesus gave a blind man back his sight? So what if Jesus gave the deaf man back his hearing? So what? What difference does that make to me? Tomorrow when I get up and I go to work and I still work in the same lousy job and I still can't make enough to make ends meet, and I still don't get a good report from the doctor, and the roof still leaks, and the checkbook still won't balance, and the kids are still mean and won't listen, and my head hurts, and the truck's out of gas, and I'm broke, and so what? What difference does it make that Jesus healed a leper? Does it make any difference to me here in 2014? Does it make any difference to me, little old me, right here in Cabarrus County, here in August? What difference does that make? Should I care? I mean, yeah, it's cool to know that Jesus could walk on water. It's great to know that He could do those things, but in all honesty, I don't need Him to walk on water. I need my checkbook to balance. In all honesty, I don't need Him to turn the water into wine. I need a good report from the doctor. Those are the so what. And so that's what I hope to deal with and look at over these next few weeks. In looking at some of these miracles and address the so what. What difference does it make that here in John chapter 2, the first miracle that Jesus performed was the turning of the water into wine at the wedding? So what? What difference does it make? Let's be honest, this is a great example of what I'm talking about of the miracles, because when we talk about this miracle, what happens? Invariably, anytime the discussion of this miracle comes up, it centers on one thing. It'll either be people who are opposed to drinking, who are having to defend this and try to explain it, or it will be those who are all right with drinking alcohol, who are saying, yeah, but Jesus turned the water into wine. And that's the focus of this miracle. Everybody wants to discuss what's the wine. Was it grape juice? Was it fermented? Was it alcohol? What in the world is that about? And if that's what you want, you're going to miss it this morning because I'm not even going to talk about that. Maybe another day, another time. But I don't think that's the focus. I don't think Jesus gave us, the Holy Spirit inspired John to record this miracle for us to answer the burning question of whether or not we should have ABC stores. I don't believe that's what, I really don't. I'm sorry, but I just don't think that's what this miracle is for. I think there's got to be a bigger reason. I think there's got to be a more important reason why he decided to put this first miracle in front of us. And I think it's really simple when you begin to think about it and understand the dynamics, understand the culture of that time. That when Jesus came into this setting, they were literally dealing with a disaster. A disaster of epic proportion. I don't know how familiar you are with the story and the details, but if you just remind you, even if you are familiar, but very simply that Jesus and his mother and some others have been invited to a wedding. And again, our point of reference is largely a wedding today. That's what we kind of have our mindset. When we think about a wedding, that's all we know. That's all we've ever been to. And you know how they work. You have you send out an invitation. And I generally, when I'm talking to couples and families about planning a wedding, and they'll start wondering about how many seats and this and that, and I'll ask, how many did you invite? And they'll tell me 150, and I say, you need 75 seats. That's just, with people, their schedule and everything, generally about half of what gets invited. I've missed it once in 20-some years now. Generally about half of what's invited manage to make it. People just have other things to do. They just don't arrive. But in this day and age, if you got a wedding invitation, you win. I mean, it was a major social... I'm not very socially skilled, so I don't know what the right word is. It was a major social blunder to receive a wedding invitation and not go. You just didn't, you didn't send your regards. You pretty well, as some people say about work, you didn't call in, you crawled in. I mean, you went to the wedding. Now, because there was such an emphasis on attendance, there was another important part of that wedding. When there was a wedding, it was a first-class shindig. I mean, these folks, I realize this was Israel, this were Jewish, but they could have been Baptist rednecks, okay? Because when they had a wedding, they had a party. They would have the wedding typically over later in the afternoon, and when they got done at the synagogue, when they got done with the wedding itself, the whole wedding party, I mean everybody, all the invitees, they would have a parade through town, and they would go from the church back to the house. And there, we have a wedding today. You have a 2 o'clock wedding, 15-20 after 2. The wedding's over. An hour and a half later, the pictures are done. Pictures take longer than the wedding. You go out, you cut a cake, eat a few peanuts, drink a little punch. By 4:30, 5 o'clock, everybody's gone. Only people left are those cleaning up. When these folks had a wedding, everybody came and went over to the house, and they would sometimes stay for days and days. And I mean, this was a first-class shindig. I mean, they threw down, they put on the chow. I mean, they put on the feed bag when they had a wedding. And because it was so imperative that if you got invited, you went, if I'm going to go to all the trouble to be there, you better feed me. I'm talking a legal repercussion. If you ran out of food, if you ran out of wine, you actually could be in trouble legally. That's how I know they were Baptist and rednecks. If you ran out of food, you actually could be in trouble with the law. I mean, that's how important it was. So, when you and I hear, they're out of wine. For you and I today, no problem. It's kind of like going to a restaurant today and you order a Diet Coke. We don't have Diet Coke. Will Diet Pepsi be all right? And sometimes I'll let them know I really want a Diet Coke just to see how they react. Just see how they react. I spent several years ago now that we were eating pizza at a restaurant. And it was in a little shopping center. And I ordered a Diet Coke. And the lady says, we're out of Diet Coke. And the food line's next door. She looked at me like I was crazy. And I go get me a Diet Coke. I want a Diet Coke. And she just looked at him and said, okay, I'll go get me a Diet Coke. So I walked next door and I picked up a couple of 2-liter Diet Cokes and brought them back and bring me ice. I'm good. Listen, for you and I, the idea, well, I'll do, they tell us today we're out of Coke, we're out of tea, well, I'll just drink water. That's kind of, when, you see that happen all the time. When they ran out of wine, if they ran out of food, this was a major disaster. I mean, it was a social disgrace. It didn't matter how pretty the bride was. It didn't matter how good the musicians were. It didn't matter how sharp the preacher looked. Nothing. If you ran out of food, it was a disaster of epic proportion. I mean, years later, they'd be saying, were you at Archie's wedding? Yeah, they ran out of food. That's the way that's the way it would be. It wouldn't be, Archie sure wasn't much. He was an ugly groom. None of that kind of stuff. It wouldn't be the bride was beautiful. It wouldn't be, boy, the church was decorated wonderfully. It wouldn't be that. But did you hear that? Did you hear that singer? Oh, who was that? They ran out of food. I told you they were Baptists. That was a big thing. And so when they ran out of wine, this was a disaster. This was a major problem. How in the world will they handle it? What will Jesus' response be to this major disaster? Again, I know for you and I to think, hey, they've run, I'll just drink water. It's not that big a deal. For them, it would have been a big deal. For them, it would have been epic to run out of food or out of wine. How in the world will Jesus respond? I think we learn not so much really from Jesus in this story. And again, it shows kind of the problem when you have a miracle like this. This one we focus on the wine. We focus on Jesus. But I think the real focus in this story has to be on Mary. How does Mary react to this dilemma? How will Mary react when the world literally is falling apart? I mean, again, I just don't have anything comparable for you. Let's say this. The only thing I can think of equivalent for you and I, for them running out of wine or food at a wedding, would be for you and I to show up at a wedding and the bride not show up. That's about how huge a story it was for them to run out of food. And so what does Mary do? How does Mary react in the face of such a disaster? 3 things she does that I think are critical, that are the focal point of this miracle for you and I to understand. How do we deal with checkbooks that won't balance, kids that won't behave, a marriage that is crumbling, a job that we don't like, or maybe ending, maybe out of work? How do we deal with those kinds of disasters in our life? First thing we learn from Mary is really fairly simple. In fact, the whole passage is really fairly simple in how Mary reacts. Notice what she does. To begin with, the Bible says Mary returns to Jesus. Look what it does. What she does. She's going along, and the news comes they're out of wine. And she says to Jesus, they have no wine. First thing I learned in this story, the first thing that is important to understand in this story in dealing with the disasters of life, whatever shape, whatever form they take, whatever they look like, job, family, health, whatever they look like, is to learn what Mary did. First thing Mary did was she turned around and looked at Jesus and said, they have no wine. They're out of wine. Now, let's be honest. In our culture, what do? We are, and I think part of it's because we're American. We're American, we're strong, we're independent. Males in particular, we've been taught since we were little, big boys don't cry, all that kind of stuff. Women, women's libs come along and told them, they're all strong and independent, you can do anything anybody else can do, and all those things. And so when disasters happen in our life, first thing we want to do is fix it. First thing we want to do is handle it. If that doesn't work, we call Dr. Phil. If that doesn't work, we go to the bookstore and get us one of those self-help books. We go everywhere and we talk to everybody. We look for every kind of advice, every kind of answer possibly known to man. When Mary shows us real simple, what do you do when the wheels fall off? What do you do when the doctor gives you a lousy report? What do you do when the marriage is crumbling? What do you do when you get laid off? What do you do when the doctor gives you bad news? What do you do when things are not going the way you think they should? Mary says, you know what? You go to Jesus. It's that simple. That's all, she didn't, she just simply, as they were going along, she doesn't fall apart. She doesn't panic. She doesn't, go into a screaming fit. She doesn't cry. She doesn't stomp her feet. She turns around and she says, Jesus, they're out of wine. She doesn't know, that's straightforward. She doesn't talk to the disciples. She doesn't go ask the master of the house, are you sure you don't have some put back in a closet somewhere? Can you borrow some from the neighbor? She goes straight. She cuts out all the middlemen. She cuts out all the other resources. She goes right straight to Jesus and says, Jesus, they're out of wine. One of the first things that we need to understand, and maybe the word should be there, remember Jesus. Maybe that should be the way that I word that, because so many times we get caught up in the disaster and we forget all about Jesus. After everything else has fallen apart and we don't know, then He's like our last resort. I remember years ago, in elementary school. Some of you, I don't know, some of you here, you're young enough, y'all had cubby holes. We didn't have a cubby hole. Jackson Park Elementary, in the back of the room, like I think a lot of people growing up, what you had in the back of the room, you had what looked like 2 garage doors. Anybody else remember those? One was the boys' side, one was the girls' side. When you went in the morning, they raised up that thing, you put your jacket in there, and then they pulled the door down. Well, right up across the top of it, I remember one class, and it said, she'd cut out letters, and right across the top of the board, it said, before all else fails, follow the directions. You catch that? Before all else fails, follow the directions. Now, that's not the way you generally hear that, is it? Generally, it's when all else fails, follow the directions, which is typically the way we do it. There's not a man in this room. I'm sorry, fellas. I am one. I'm with you. There is not a man in this room who has had kids or grandkids who somewhere near Christmas has not sat down with something, where you can say, the Chinese have been getting us for years. Send stuff over here with those 3 little words on the outside. You know what they are? Some assembly required. I don't know what you know about Chinese, but in Chinese what that means is engineering degree required. But there is not a man in here who has not sat down and looked at the pictures. Oh, I can put this together. And get done, and there's a whole stack of pieces left, and it don't work. And you have to take it all back apart and follow the directions. Before all else fails, follow the directions. Turn to Jesus, she says. Look to Jesus. That's what she does. She doesn't go anywhere else. She goes right straight to Jesus. Now, notice what she does. You can't just go to Jesus, because then she does the second thing that's important is not only does she return to Jesus, but then she relies on Jesus. Look what she does. When Jesus comes to her, she doesn't have anywhere else to go. She doesn't have anywhere else to do. She tells Jesus the problem. And again, it is a major problem. Again, for you and I, not a big problem. Drink something else. But for them, it was a big problem. And so Jesus says to her, woman, what do I have to do with you? Now, I know for you and I, that's one of the other focal points of this passage. Generally, when we read this passage, we read that and we go, oh, I can't believe Jesus said that. Can't believe He said that. Woman, for the teenagers in here, you don't have to be a teenager. If you're an adult and your mother's living, try that one. Pam, when y'all go to lunch today, and Edna says something, you go, woman, see how that works. JJ's nodding his head. He thinks he could get away with it. You're not that big, buddy. I know how tall you are. You're not that big. She'll climb you like a tree. You don't even drag the rest of us into it. We can't help you. We're not going to help you if you're that brave or that dumb. I don't know which one that is. But actually, when Jesus says that, it really wasn't what, when we see it, we're like, oh, I can't believe He said that. It was actually, the word woman is a word that would better translate to us as lady. It was actually more of a term of respect. And when Jesus says here, what do I have to do with you? My time is not yet come. What Jesus was saying And this is important to the whole story. Jesus is saying, it's not time for me to be revealed. It's not time for me to come forward and to be publicly recognized as the Messiah. That's all he's saying. He's not being sarcastic or biting off the head of his mother. He's just simply saying, Mom, it's not time yet for me to do anything about it. It's not time for me to be publicly recognized as the Messiah. And again, so it was a sense of honor. And so when you read this story, really what you discover, and you look at it, when you look through it, the question then comes, well, why in the world did Jesus turn the water into wine? You read this miracle, you read these 10 verses, and honestly, if you read them, you're left scratching your head. Well, why did he do it? He's already told us that it's not time for me to be known as the Messiah. He's not, yes, somebody's going to be in trouble if they run out of wine, but it's not going to be him. He's just a guest. He doesn't have anything at stake. They're not going to be saying down the road, Jesus ran out of wine. They're going to be saying whoever's wedding it was ran out of wine. When you read this story, the only reason you can find that Jesus turned the water into wine is because his mother asked him to. Let that sink in for a minute. That's good stuff right there. Jesus didn't gain anything. He didn't gain popularity or fame because if you read this story, you find out it doesn't appear that anybody even knew Jesus did it. In fact, in a moment you read the story, and when the water is actually turned to wine, they go to the master of the house, and the master of the house tastes the wine and says, hey, why have you saved this wine back? In other words, he says, what was kind of the tradition of the time was they'd bring out the good stuff first and get everybody kind of full and a little bit lit, and then they could bring out the cheap stuff and pass it by and water it down a notch. Well, here the master of the feast says, wait a minute, you brought out the good stuff last. You've saved it. And so everybody thinks that what has happened was they went back into the back somewhere, into their wine cellar, and brought out the good stuff. Nobody even knows Jesus did it. So Jesus doesn't gain any popularity points. Nobody comes running over and says, Jesus, bud, man, you saved the day. He tells them, I don't want the fame. I don't want to be known yet. He wouldn't have been in legal trouble if they ran out of wine. There's only one reason that you find. I challenge you. I challenged them at 8:30. I told them, go read it, and if you can find out another reason, if you can prove to me wrong, I won't preach at the second service. We'll just have a sing. Well, you see I'm preaching, so evidently they couldn't think of one. There's no other reason that Jesus turned this water into wine other than his mother asked him to. It bothered Mary, and that bothered Jesus. If you don't hear anything else I say today, hear that. That what concerns you concerns God. See, Satan is a master of coming along and, I don't know, he hadn't, I don't think. Ryan's twisted his ankle. You hadn't, have you? Okay, I wonder if I was a fortune teller or something, but Ryan's twisted his ankle. And, in the grand scheme of things, that's a good 4 foot from his heart, so it's not a big deal. What's the big deal? Ryan says, well, I got a twisted ankle, but, over there, that person's got a heart disease, or that person's got cancer, or, that man's in the hospital, and I just got a twisted. And Satan will come along and climb up on your shoulder and say, oh, your problem isn't important. It doesn't matter. It's just a little twisted ankle. God doesn't care. Don't bother God with that. Doesn't matter what your problem is. Satan is a master of coming along and telling you your problem doesn't matter. It's a small problem. God doesn't care. I think this miracle, again, it's not about whether or not the wine was grape juice or alcohol. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whose wedding it was. It doesn't matter that Jesus called his mother woman. Doesn't matter. What matters is that you and I learn from this story that something that is, that let's be honest, in the grand scheme of things is relatively insignificant, mattered to Jesus. Jesus cares if Tommy gets that contract. Jesus cares what goes on at the cleaners. Jesus cares what goes on down on Park Street, Park Drive. He cares. He cares. He cares if Ryan sprains his ankle. He cares if you got a blister. Listen, the thing we learn from this miracle is that what goes on in your life is of infinite importance to God Himself. That there is nothing too insignificant. What does the Bible tell us? He says, cast your cares on me. Bring your burdens to me. Every one of them. Not the big ones, not the major ones. See, here's something that I think most of you have probably learned in life. What's a disaster in my life isn't always a disaster in somebody else's life. Let's be honest. If I have a flat tire, I'm probably not going to be real happy about it. But two things. I got AAA. And if all else fails, I got a jack and a spare tire, and I know how to change a spare tire. On the other hand, if Malia has a flat tire, oh, heaven help us. I mean, she's calling the president. It is, a major problem. I don't even know where to begin to describe the magnitude, of the stress that will be delivered into her life, because, and she gets it honest, by the way, she gets it honest from her mother. Honest. I don't even mean flat tire. I mean the air pressure's low. Oh no, we might need to trade the car in. I mean that kind of disaster. Some things are, what's a disaster in my life may not be a disaster in your life. What you think is a disaster, I may go, that's nothing. That's nothing. Rhonda asked me a while ago about my back, and I said, Rhonda, I ain't complaining about my back to you. I ain't saying a word. I'm not going to complain about it. Sylvia Coleman asked me, Sylvia, my back's great. I'm not complaining about my back to you. No way, no how. Never. Not going to happen. Listen, what's a disaster in one person's life may not be a disaster in somebody else. But what is a disaster in your life is a disaster to Jesus. That's the message of this miracle. That He cares about everything. He says He knows the number of hairs on your head. Granted, for some that's easier to count than others, but He knows. He cares. She relied on Jesus. She takes what Jesus says. She goes to Him. And listen, she didn't have plan B. Jesus wasn't plan B. That was the only plan she had. That was the only option she had. We see that because in just a moment, look what she does. Mary does something that is critical for you and I to understand. Not only does she return and rely, but she responded to Jesus. Look what it says. She turns to the servants and she says to them, do what He says. Do what He says. You want me to tell you the biggest problem we have in our times of disaster is, we go to Jesus, we talk to Jesus, but then we don't do what He says. Jesus says to her, or Mary says to the servants, do what He says. Do you know what Jesus told them to do? Now again, you and I, because of culture, we may not get this. But Jesus says to them, go over there and get there were 6 pots, it says. And they were there for purifying. Now, what do you purify? But think about it. What do you purify? But something that's dirty. You don't purify pure water. You purify something that is nasty. And so this water was there for purifying. What that means is these were the pots of water where they washed their feet and their hands. Now, I don't know about you, but I think I'd just about as soon drink foot water as hand water. Now, some of you think about it for a minute. Most people walk around with their feet covered up in shoes and socks. I don't know where your hands has been. I don't know. I'm getting more and more leery about this shaking hands thing. I don't know where your hands has been. I'll be honest with you, doesn't nothing upset me much worse than have a doctor walk in the room. First thing he does, stick out his hand. Especially depending on what kind of doctor he is. I don't know where you've been, Doc. I'll be honest, they say that we would be better off, germ speaking, to go back to biblically kissing each other on the cheek than shaking hands. Because most people will put their hands places they will never put their cheek. Think about it. Yeah. Listen, this was some nasty water. This is where they washed their feet and their hands. And I got to remind you, what I said a while ago, our feet, we generally keep them covered up. They just walk around in sandals and dirt. Their feet were nasty. They didn't have ivory and Irish Spring and all that. Even when they was clean, they probably wasn't clean by most of our standards. How many of you have ever had your kid run out and you said, "You take a bath?" "Yeah." You go look at them and say, "Go back and do it over." Clean is a moving target. Let's be honest. And Jesus says to them, "Go over there and dip in the foot water. And take it to the master and let him taste it." Mary says, "Do what he says." Now, I got to remind you of a couple things about that story. He tells the servants to go get foot water and take it to the master. Are you with me? Servants. You know what a servant is. I'm not talking about like today. I'm talking about that time, servant. Taking the master foot water. What do you think happens to a servant who serves the master foot water? It'll probably be the last water he serves anybody, anywhere. And Mary says, "Just do it. Just do it." When did the water become wine? If you read the language and you look at it closely, I believe it's obvious that the water became wine when the servant dipped the water and took it to the master. In other words, they had to be obedient before the miracle took place. See, we have a different... I want you to think for a moment about our disaster praying. Doesn't our disaster praying sound something like this? "Lord, if you will heal my son, if you will heal my daughter, I'll start going to church." Isn't that the way our disaster praying sounds? "Lord, if you'll get me out of this mess, if you'll just find me a job, I'll start tithing." Isn't that the way our disaster praying sounds? "Lord, if you will do this, then I will respond." But this miracle shows us we got it backwards. Mary says, "Do what he says." Then God responds. See, we want to go about our life doing whatever we want to, however we want to, and then when everything falls apart, "Oh God, fix it, and if you fix it, I'll start going to church. Oh God, if you fix it, I'll start singing in the choir. Oh God, if you fix it, I'll start giving. Oh God, if you fix it, I'll start going to Sunday school. Oh God," and we're always playing these bargaining chips with God. And the Bible, pretty much from front to back, this miracle included, shows us that's not the way it operates. God says, miracle says, you be obedient, and then God responds. I know I've told you this story before. I know you've heard it before. Close with this. Man walking along, slips off the edge of a cliff, and on his way down he grabs a limb. He's hanging there and he starts yelling, "Help, help! Anybody up there, help!" And a big voice comes booming from heaven, "Turn loose of the limb, my son, and I will lift you up." He hangs there for a few minutes, thinks that over, and then he finally yells out, "Is there anybody else up there?" That's the way we react in disaster. God, what's your plan? Let me think about that for a minute. Now I think I'll do it some other way. Mary says, you go to Jesus and Jesus alone, not Dr. Phil, not Maury, not the self-help section at the library. You go to Jesus and you do what He says. That's simple. It really is. Oh, it's simple to describe, tough to do. Tough to do. Turn loose of the limb and trust Him. See, I don't know what you're dealing with this morning. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what battle you're facing. But I can tell you this, the answer is not at Maury. It's not in all the good advice that everybody may give you. The answer is very simple. Look to Him. Look to Him. And do what He says. I want to ask you to bow your heads for one moment. You're here this morning and you know beyond a shadow of a doubt you're a Christian, you've been saved, but life's been tough. Seems like you've been dealing with disaster after disaster. And you've tried almost everything. Why don't you give up this morning and try what Jesus says? You need to come this morning and kneel at this altar and say, "Lord, help me through this problem. Show me what I need to do. Give me the strength to be obedient. Give me the strength to be obedient."